Just to say that what we're talking to you about is we are what's called the Open Recognition Work Group. We're representing the Open Recognition Work Group, which is part of, it's a community of practice within something called the Open Skills Network, which has been funded by Walmart Foundation and is administered by Western Governors University. And the idea there is that skills frameworks need not be rigid hierarchical things that are developed over years. They can also be collections that build within communities of practice. And we're in there to break furniture and knock over glassware to say that what about learners? Do learners get to decide what they know and can do and can tell their own story? Because before we arrived, a lot of it was still top-down, communities, but still top-down. So you're seeing right here Crystal Rawls, who's a member of that community, and there are other people in this room actually who show up on those calls. And Crystal works at California State University, Dominguez Hills, and her big mantra, her big mission is the success of BIPOC students in post-secondary. So Black, Indigenous, people of color, getting that key credentials, sticking for those 4 years. And she's actually a walking, talking example of that herself. So I'm currently working with her, again wearing the consulting hat, working with OBF Technologies to work with students in transition, students who have transitioned from 2-year colleges and making the transition to 4-year colleges, and also what they call first-gen students, as she was. Her parents did not go to higher education. So we are modeling with those students how to focus not on what their deficits are, but what their positives are, an appreciative inquiry that they would do, work on themselves with help, to decide what got them there, what will take them forward in the future. So that's a bit of an intro.
So a lot of skills frameworks are involve exclusion. So someone defines what is involved in the skills framework, and then anybody who can't access it, well, that's kind of their problem. Whereas what we're focusing on here is inclusion, and Crystal is a wonderful example of that. And like some of the people here, is just a shining light and full of energy as well. So what we're focusing on today is all about community-defined skills. Lots of us have been involved in that. I was involved with leading the web literacy work at Mozilla, which is all about defining skills from the community and giving them legitimacy. But when we define skills from the community, we kind of need to be aware that there are some things which are unseen. So I am Justin Mason today. Justin can't be here. He's based in the US. He's one of the leaders of the group that Julie and him co-lead for the OSN working group. And he often uses this diagram to kind of talk about the difference between, formal schooling at the top, above the iceberg, the kind of stuff that we see. So, I have my doctoral certificate on my wall at home in my office. I'm very proud of it. But then there's all of the other things that we have, like non-formal training and informal learning, which are below the waterline. Often they're things which might be seen by some people in some contexts, but often aren't seen at all, and certainly not the kind of things you'd put on your LinkedIn profile. So the thing which we're talking about today is recognition, just to highlight that for you there. The stuff which is often below the waterline. So in this case here, it's recognition from training providers and employers and peers. And then further down, in terms of informal learning, the recognition you have from community and peers, and also self-assertion, saying that you're good at something and you like someone else to endorse it. Unfortunately, the way that an iceberg works is that some things, it looks like it's hierarchical, and that's not the case. What we're trying to show with this image is that some things are more visible than others. We're not saying that one thing is more important than another thing. This is an image from Serge. I don't think he's in the room. But what I really like about this diagram, which is taken from the Merva project, and you can access this at openrecognition.org/resources, is that this plane of recognition, as it's referred to.
Its own name.
Yeah, the plane of recognition. What I like about this diagram is that it shows that recognition is central to all different kinds of learning. Whether it's informal or formal, if it's traditional or non-traditional, the recognition of someone else appears right in the center of that. And if you were in the other presentation that I gave this morning, when I was explaining this image, which I used in that presentation as well, every time you give someone a credential, you're also recognizing them because it's to do with the relationship between you, either as an organization or as an individual, and the person who is receiving that credential in the form of recognition. So I'm going to hand over to Julie now. Do you want me to be your laptop monkey?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not getting up.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Oh, you could use that.
Oh, all right, that's true.
Yeah.
All right, unless I screw it up. No, that's good. So we've talked a lot. I've heard the word community of practice over and over and over the last 2 days, which I actually did not expect. And I love hearing it because I think badging has a particular role that it can play. And what was interesting about the Open Recognition Group, these are people, some new to Open Badges, some new to Open Recognition, some have been doing it forever. And yet we realized after 13 months of meeting about how we were going to contribute to the Open Skills Network, basically in a subversive way, we realized that we weren't recognizing each other, yet we were constantly all coming back to this meeting and working and thinking about how we were going to help the OSN really open up and design for inclusion. Because systems are designed for exclusion. And so what are the practices you are actually going to put in place for inclusion? And that takes a ton of work. And we put in a lot of work. And then after 13 months, it was really Crystal and Justin were saying, we're all coming back. We're all working together really well. You've taught me things. I've connected with Don. Now Don is working at my university. Lots of things started to happen. This social networking, social capacity started to happen. And we realized we needed to recognize one another. So we just decided to ask Nate to spin us up a little Osmint library. And again, we'll talk about Osmint offline, I think, just so we don't waste our time. But I'm happy to chat about it, and Nate is too, I'm sure. We just started throwing up skills, and they were scaffolded. But we used it as almost like a lever for a process. And so these were some of the ones that we started to come up with. And actually, these are aligned with some that Don, I think you dunted my head, actually is an existing badge. But these were things that were actually, we realized we were recognizing practices. So if you're in a community of practice and you're using open recognition, open badges, any type of technology, it's not necessarily about outcomes. It's about the practices. What is keeping this group coming together? How do you become a trusted community? And how do you design it for inclusion? Which means that people who aren't usually in the room, when they come in the room, you've got to change the contours of the room. And you've got to make sure that people are feeling like this is a trusted place for them, and you're not constantly talking in an echo chamber, which we often do. So this is for all of us. And then it's about context. So what we realized too when we were coming up with different soft skills, I guess is how you would talk about it, there are tons of frameworks. I've worked with teachers a long time. If you kind of start with the rubric and start with the framework, everybody's going to go to sleep. Like, you can't do it. So even when it feels like you're reinventing the wheel, the group has to come together. What are the practices? What are the skills that matter to us right now? And then go to the alignment. Turns out, curiosity means a certain thing in our group. It doesn't mean that that doesn't exist in 50 million other frameworks. It does. So once you kind of identify those practices within your specific community practice, then you can do the process of alignment. And then this gets in a little bit of the rich skills descriptors. I'll say quickly, even though I said I wasn't going to talk about Osmint, that the idea of the open skills management tool was a way for organizations to essentially upload the skills that matter to them, and then ultimately Osmint would serve as a repository of these RSDs that people can use and search and so on. And this tool is very much in development, and our job from the Open Recognition Group was to make sure that this technology was not exclusionary. That has been our primary goal, and I think we've been pretty focused on that. I'm sure we're driving them crazy. So I can't believe Serge isn't here because we're just using all of Serge's frameworks. So if somebody should tell him. So I actually was not actually familiar with this. Justin, this is from Irvine, yeah.
So when you're defining things within a small group of people, you can make things make sense to your friends, to your colleagues, and it makes sense because you're sharing a very localized context. You can also impose things on a societal level, so the government or a very influential organization can impose things from the top down. So you've got on the left-hand side the micro, which is kind of bottom up, and on the macro level you've got the top down. But this meso level, and again this is Serge's work, is in the middle of those two, and this is where rich skill descriptors come in. So rich skill descriptors, as we'll hear from in a moment, are a way of defining skills which are both human and machine readable. So you can read it as a human being and make sense of it, but also a machine can and kind of do some things which machines do in terms of figuring out how that works across a community and across different systems, etc. So that meso level is a thing that we're trying to focus on with these rich skill descriptors so that they can make sense between communities, not just within a single community.
So, so essentially, what we did as a community when we came together, we used a number of methods. We used, post-it boards and things like that, talking about the principles, why we were doing it, etc. Some people boiled those down, clustered those, developed our principles for recognition. And then we started brainstorming particular skills. And one of the things I'd like to say with this is that I mentioned breaking furniture and knocking over glassware. We didn't always come up with perfectly formed skills. Sometimes they were achievements. Sometimes they were badges. It didn't matter, right? Because this is a brainstorming thing. This is the mutual recognition point. So there could be certain skills that would end up skill badge. There could be a badge with several skills in it. We were essentially just getting those thoughts out there. So right now we have in the Osmet tool that Nate set up for us, we now have 21 skills, and those we're now essentially manually aligning to them. So we're using the alignment field, but we're not using a particular tool to do that. We could, at somewhere down the line, do that. The main thing to say is these skills are in collection format. So in other words, it's a flat collection. It's not a hierarchy of skills, and that's one approach you can have. And Credential Engine can handle that approach, for example, and they can also handle a hierarchical approach. Shall I talk about Credential Engine a bit?
We can, yeah. Oh,
okay.
This is an example.
Okay, so skill statement, right. So this is the well-formed skill statement that we often broke, okay? So in other words, the subject, subject of a sentence, what they do, and what context they do it in. Context obviously being very, very important. So sometimes we basically, well, you dented my head might kind of fit.
Yeah, that was pretty good.
Yeah, okay. But other ones were, good note taker or whatever. So a lot of them were essentially, just getting thoughts out on paper. So maybe we can go to the next one. Yeah, so you can create a rich skills descriptor if you wish. This is an input form. Again, Nate, thank you. It's a form. Isn't this the form you made? Oh, Justin made it. Okay,
yeah, it
great.
conforms to the fields in the...
Oh, okay, great. So that's a form. You're welcome to put that in there. This is part of what Julie was talking about in terms of keeping things accessible for people to do. So it's interesting because now we're trying to decide, okay, what if other people might want to use these skills? What if we want to make these skills a little more portable? And we've been in a few discussions with Credential Engine about this. And one of the things actually Deb Everhart suggested was, which I thought was really good, was that there's skills you might want to just keep in your own community and just use to recognize each other. There's other skills you might want to buff up a bit and make linkages to other frameworks if you wish, and you can map those to Credential Engine if you are a legitimate organization, which we as this group of idiots breaking furniture are not always seen as, but they welcome the idea, for example, of reconnaître being a legitimate organization that would choose to map a skill. And there may be a doorway for the French aspect of reconnaître to get involved in this if you're interested. So that's just, something to leave you with.
Well, just really quickly then, one of the things about this Osmet tool, which you need to talk to Nate about if you're interested, one of the things, so you've just been talking about Credential Engine, Don, which has gatekeepers. Like you have to have an organization, whatever. The point about Osmet is that it's open source technology, and as a bit of an anarchist, I like this approach because actually I don't think that the world is super shiny. I think the most interesting things in the world are a bit messy. So when it comes to us doing the work, It is a little bit messy, and eventually it'll be shinier and more accessible to people, etc. But to begin with, the work is messy, and that's okay. So your next steps, if you find any of this interesting, is to join the Keep Badges Weird community, which we've already been talking about. Go to badges.community. Join the OSN Open Recognition Working Group. There's the link there on Bitly. Sign the board, the Bologna Open Recognition Declaration. You can issue a badge to someone. Oh, this says Badge Summit. We haven't changed that. We did this presentation in America as well. Issue a badge to someone here at the conference. You don't have to ask permission to issue a badge to someone. You can just do it. In fact, Nate made a badge yesterday, I think, or this morning, for people who are doing stealth skills badges. You can also edit Badge Wiki. So Badge Wiki is a knowledge base for the Open Badges community. Anyone can edit it. It uses the same technology as Wikipedia. So do one of those things there, and Julie's going to finish off.
Yeah, and then I was just, and the last statement is really just who gets to name skills really does matter. So this, I think the trial has been great. To me, the difference is who gets to name the skills? Who creates the badge? Who creates the credential? Is it a bottom-up process? Is it a top-down process? Both are available. You just have to be direct about it. And like Mrs. Badge said, just be honest about who you are. If you're building a micro-credential for a top-down process, just say it. And then, but the community-defined skills, those are defined, that's defined by inclusion. And I think that's kind of where we're interested in working. But again, all comers are welcome. Right? So I think that's it.
Yeah.
And yeah.
No time for questions, sorry. Okay, one question. As the victims of the next panel come down, maybe, this is the panel talking about bridging recognition. So, great. Any questions? Hand up, anybody? Oh, Simone.
It's more of a comment. I like the definition of meso skills that Serge had, and I think as we try to build community, often our identity is defined by our shared interest or practice, which is in between our identity. So it's the meso layer that is very important for us. And so if we can think about what are those skills that belong in that meso thing, maybe we could all just, what are those skills in the Open Recognition Alliance space?
So we don't have to define skills in a way which has to work for everyone for all time, but nor do we want to define them in a way which only makes sense to our community. We need to define them in such a way that it has a format that could be reused, a bit like Creative Commons licensing. Right, cool. Let's go.